The silence in the deposition room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that only exists when people are confronted with the wreckage of their own bad decisions. Across the polished conference table, Brenda, the president of the Heritage Creek Homeowners Association, sat with the 4 other members of her board. Their faces, which moments before had been a mixture of smug confidence and bored arrogance, were now pale, slack-jawed canvases. A pure, uncomprehending horror. Their lawyer, a man who had been all bluster and condescension an hour ago, was now frantically and silently shuffling through a mountain of paperwork, his face the color of chalk. My lawyer, a calm, steady man named Arthur, gestured to the massive, de-ring binder of evidence we had placed on the table. It was open to a specific highlighted page, a bank statement for the HOA. "Ms. Johnson," said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an executioner's axe. He was speaking to Brenda. "Could you please explain to us, under oath, this particular transaction from last May? It's a payment for $50,000 to a company called Prestige Landscaping Solutions for the complete revitalization of the community entrance. According to the state's business registry, Prestige Landscaping Solutions is a company whose sole registered agent is your brother. And according to the sworn affidavits we have from 3 other landscaping companies, no such revitalization project ever took place." The color drained completely from her face. The other board members, who had been sitting smugly beside her, now began to look at each other with a dawning, panicked terror. They had no idea I knew. They had no idea I had the receipts. They thought this was a deposition about my non-compliant mailbox, and that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? Subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment of beautiful, financial annihilation, you have to understand my career, and you have to understand the quiet life I was trying to build. My name is David. For 40 years, my life was a war fought not with weapons, but with numbers. I was a forensic accountant, a bloodhound of the balance sheet. My job was to go into the books of massive, corrupt corporations and find the truth. I followed the money. I untangled the complex webs of fraud, embezzlement, and self-dealing. I was the man they called when they needed to find the body, and the body was always buried in the fine print of a fraudulent invoice. It was a stressful, high-stakes life, and when I retired, I wanted the exact opposite. I wanted peace. I wanted a garden. I wanted a life so simple and uncomplicated, it would bore my former self to tears. I found what I was looking for in a beautiful, historic home on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was perfect for one very specific, very important reason. It was in holding a pre-existing property that had never been legally incorporated into the massive, surrounding Heritage Creek development. The real estate listing had said it in big, bold letters, the 3 most beautiful words in the English language: no HOA. I bought it in cash and looked forward to a life of blissful, unregulated freedom. My freedom lasted for approximately 48 hours. On my second day, as I was happily unloading bags of organic soil for my new garden, a gleaming black luxury SUV glided to a silent stop at my curb. A woman with a helmet of perfectly coiffed hair and a face that looked like it was permanently smelling something unpleasant emerged. It was Brenda, the president of the Heritage Creek HOA. "Good morning," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that didn't quite mask the steel beneath it. "I'm Brenda, the president. I'm the one who ensures our community maintains its financial integrity and its aesthetic prestige." Her eyes swept over my modest, historic home with a look of open disdain. "I'm David," I said. "The new owner," as she said. And we were all so surprised. The realtor's listing that this property was not in the HOA was, of course, a unfortunate and legally irrelevant mistake. All homes within the geographical boundaries of Heritage Creek are mandatory members. It's for the financial health of the community. I'll have our management company send over the welcome packet and your first invoice for dues immediately. Just smiled. I was retired. I wasn't looking for a fight. But I was also a man who had spent 40 years dealing with bullies and liars. "Brenda," I said, my voice still friendly. "I'm a retired forensic accountant. I personally reviewed the chain of title, the original plat maps, and the HOA's own articles of incorporation before I made an offer on this house. I can assure you, with a level of documentary evidence that is beyond reproach, that this property is not, and has never been, a part of your association. Have a wonderful day." I had, in that moment, done two things. I had established the undeniable legal truth, and I had made a powerful, vindictive, and deeply irrational enemy for life. She was not used to being told no, especially not by a quiet man in a gardening hat who had so clearly and calmly called her bluff. The war began, as it so often does, with paper. The fines started arriving. Notice for non-payment of mandatory dues, a violation for my driveway being made of gravel, which was deemed financially unsound and aesthetically non-compliant. It was all legally baseless, of course. The financial equivalent of a toddler throwing a tantrum. I, a man who had once written legal affidavits that had brought down entire criminal enterprises, drafted a single, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying cease and desist letter. It to Brenda, every member of her board, and to the HOA's lawyer. It cited the relevant state property laws, the federal statutes on wire and mail fraud for the sending of fraudulent invoices, and the professional sanctions for the filing of frivolous legal actions. I politely, but firmly, informed them that any further communication of a financial nature would be considered an act of criminal harassment. I assumed that would be the end of it. I had, after all, brought a nuclear weapon to a knife fight. But Brenda was not a rational actor. My legal letter did not scare her. It enraged her. It was a challenge to the very foundation of her power. Her response was to escalate. The HOA board, under her direction, passed a special resolution at their next meeting. It was a work of pure delusional fiction. They voted too formally, and retroactively absorbed my property into the association, citing a completely fabricated economic necessity and community harmony clause from their own bylaws. It was like watching a group of children declare that the moon was now part of their treehouse club. It was insane. And yet it was happening. The harassment became personal and ugly. Brenda started spreading rumors in the neighborhood. She told people I was a disgraced accountant who was probably hiding from the IRS. She told them I was a dangerous recluse who was a threat to their children. Then, she and her minions began to use the HOA's approved vendors, who were all, I would later discover, friends and family of the board members, to harass me. The HOA's. The landscaping company would accidentally blow all their grass clippings and leaves onto my property. The HOA's preferred roofing company left a flyer on my door that was less of an ad and more of a threat. It's offering their services to fix the code violations on your dilapidated roof before the county is forced to intervene. My inner monologue was a raging storm. This was a personal and a professional insult. My professional instincts, the instincts of a man who had spent a lifetime sniffing out corruption, took over. I stopped playing defense. I started investigating her. I started investigating the Heritage Creek Homeowners Association, Inc. A quick search of the public records for their financials and their contracts immediately set off alarm bells. No-bid contracts awarded to companies owned by board members, relatives. Incredibly high management fees. Complete lack of transparency. The whole thing smelled rotten. And then she made her final fatal move. A courier arrived at my door and served me with a lawsuit. The HOA was officially suing me in civil court. They were seeking a declaratory judgment from a judge to legally and forcibly incorporate my property into their association, and they were suing me for tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent fines, legal fees, and punitive damages for my willful and malicious refusal to comply with community standards. It was her big move, her grand checkmate moment. She had finally brought the full weight of the legal system to bear against me. It was going to be expensive. It was going to be stressful. It was going to be public. In her mind, she had already won. And in that moment, holding that thick, intimidating lawsuit, I will admit, I felt a flicker of fear. I was retired. I was tired. I didn't want this fight. It felt like a crushing weight. But that fear was quickly replaced by something else. A cold, familiar, and deeply satisfying anger. The anger of a predator who has just seen its prey walk, with an arrogant swagger, right into a perfectly laid trap. She thought she was dragging me onto her battlefield. She had no idea that she had just, by filing this lawsuit, been legally compelled to hand me the keys to her entire kingdom. Because as part of the discovery process for her lawsuit against me, I was now legally entitled to see everything. Every single one of the HOA's financial records for the last 7 years, every bank statement, every canceled check, every invoice, every contract, every email between board members, every single dirty little secret they had. My lawyer filed the subpoena that afternoon. A week later, a truck from a document storage service delivered 12 massive banker's boxes of files to my lawyer's office. It was the mother lode. The game was on. I spent the next 2 days fueled by black coffee and a righteous forensic fury, doing what I do best. I went through every single piece of paper. I built spreadsheets. I created flowcharts. I cross-referenced invoices with bank statements. I followed the money. And what I found was not just a little mismanagement. It was a sprawling, systemic, and breathtakingly arrogant criminal conspiracy. I found the no-show jobs, the kickbacks from vendors, it's the consulting fees paid to the board members' own shell companies, it's the family vacations to Hawaii and the Caribbean, all disguised as attending national conferences on property management. And at the center of it all, the spider in the middle of the web, was Brenda. She had been using the HOA as her own personal, multi-million-dollar piggy bank for years. And that brings us back to that beautiful, silent, and catastrophic deposition in the law office. This wasn't a meeting. It was a legally mandated deposition. Brenda and the board were required to be there. They were required to answer our questions under oath. My lawyer, guided by the meticulous, undeniable, and beautifully organized roadmap of their corruption that I had prepared for him, didn't ask a single question about me or my property. He started asking about their finances. He started with the treasurer, a nervous, sweating man named Bob. He asked him about the $50,000 landscaping contract awarded to the president's brother. He asked him about the $20,000 consulting fee paid to the vice president's husband's company, a company that had been formed 3 days earlier. He asked the secretary about the $80,000 roof repair for the clubhouse, a job that had been paid for 3 times to 3 different companies, all owned by the same person. With every question, he produced the canceled check, the fake invoice, the irrefutable proof, and then he turned to Brenda. He presented the evidence of her using HOA funds to pay for her own personal first-class family vacation to Hawaii. He had the hotel receipts. He had the airline tickets. He had the credit card statements. And the cherry on top, he had the printouts of the happy, smiling vacation photos from her own public Instagram account, time-stamped to the exact dates of the conference she had claimed to be attending. And then my lawyer delivered the final legal killing blow. He explained to the now catatonic board members the legal principle of piercing the corporate veil. He explained in calm, simple terms that because they had used their nonprofit corporation to commit fraud, to enrich themselves, to act in bad faith, they were no longer protected by that corporation. They were no longer just volunteer board members. They were a group of individuals who were now personally, jointly, and severally liable for every single dollar they had stolen, misappropriated, and defrauded from their neighbors. The lawsuit against me was, of course, dropped that very afternoon. And then my lawyer filed our countersuit. We didn't sue the Heritage Creek HOA, we sued Brenda and the 4 other board members, personally. For fraud, for racketeering, for conspiracy, and for malicious prosecution. We also, of course, delivered a copy of our entire investigation, that beautiful, massive binder of evidence, to the district attorney's office and to the criminal investigation division of the IRS. The board members were not just defeated, they were financially and personally annihilated. Their personal assets were frozen. They were forced into personal bankruptcy to begin to pay back the hundreds of thousands of dollars they had stolen from their own neighbors, a debt that would follow them for the rest of their lives. And of course, they were all facing a raft of serious criminal charges. The Heritage Creek HOA was in ruins. Its leadership gone, its finances a disaster. The now enraged and enlightened homeowners held an emergency meeting, elected a new, honest board, and their first official act was to send me a letter thanking me for exposing the corruption and saving their community. They also, of course, officially and permanently exempted my property from any and all current and future bylaws. This whole brutal war taught me a lesson that I had spent a lifetime witnessing from the other side of the ledger. People who are obsessed with money and power, who build their little kingdoms on a foundation of lies and intimidation, often believe they are smart enough to get away with it. Brenda thought she could use the HOA's financial power as a weapon to crush a quiet, retired man who just wanted to be left alone. She never, in her wildest, most arrogant dreams, imagined that her target was a man who could read a balance sheet, like a murder mystery, and that by suing him, she was just giving him the evidence he needed to write her final, devastating chapter. Brenda and her entire board are awaiting their criminal trials, and the community is slowly recovering. But the IRS, as part of their larger ongoing investigation into the years of fraud, has now decided to conduct a full, random, and deeply invasive audit of every single resident in Heritage Creek. Just to, as their letter stated, ensure community-wide financial compliance and to recover any and all unpaid tax liabilities.